Good morning and welcome to the Global Current, where Seton Hall's diplomacy students fill you in on what's going on in the world. I'm Amanda Noon.
And I'm James Janos.
Thanks for tuning in. This week in news, an update on the prosecution of Greenpeace activists in Russia, input on the embassy bombings in Syria,
And in an analysis, significant human rights reforms in China and concerns over the future leadership in Uzbekistan.
And wrapping up this week's show, executive producer Laura Toledo and Seton Hall alum Stephanie Parenti weigh in on President of the American Foreign Service Association Robert Silverman's visit to Seton Hall.
Thank you for tuning in.
There's too much I just don't know, so I'm taking it slow. There's questions I can't let go. I keep moving with my head to the stars.
First up, staffer Katya Bibi updates us on the prosecution of Greenpeace protesters in St. Petersburg courts.
2 months ago, Greenpeace UK sent a ship to Russia's Arctic coast on September 18th to protest the offshore drilling being carried out by one of Russia's largest natural gas companies, Gazprom. 28 Greenpeace activists and 2 journalists from 18 different countries, now coined the Arctic 30, participated in this protest. One Russian activist explains more about the situation in the Arctic.
This is the face of Arctic destruction. Prirazlomnaya is the first ice-capable permanent oil platform in the Arctic. It is a perfect example. It is a personification of the slowly creeping industrialization of this pristine area.
Though Greenpeace contends it was a peaceful protest, several of the activists attempted to scale an oil platform in Russian waters, which President Putin explained, quote, created an emergency situation, end quote, according to a news report by Voice of Russia. Armed Russian Coast Guard officers apprehended the Arctic 30 on charges of piracy, which carries a 15-year jail term. They were held in detention in the Arctic port of Murmansk until earlier this November, when they were moved to St. Petersburg by prison train. Now, before the St. Petersburg courts, the Greenpeace activists face charges of hooliganism as part of an organized group which is punishable by up to 7 years in prison. While a less drastic sentence, this is still seen as harsh by the rest of the world. The 30 are being held at 3 different pre-trial detention centers across the city as they await bail decisions by Russian courts. Greenpeace International has set out bail requests for all 30 activists. However, not all requests have been granted by the Russian courts. This past week, 26 of the 30 activists were granted bail, including Captain Peter Wilcox of the U.S. Wilcox has been a Greenpeace activist for more than 30 years and was part of a similar protest in 1985 as the skipper of the ship Rainbow Warrior that was blown up by the French Secret Service, as reported by the Huffington Post. On Wednesday, Brazilian activist Ana Paula Alminahana Maciel was the first person released on bail and was given back her passport. However, she and the rest of the released activists are still charged and are not allowed to leave the city of St. Petersburg until the situation has been resolved. The bail hearings continue until Friday, November 22nd, and as of our recording date on November 21st, 10 more activists have had their hearings. Colin Russell of Australia, who acted as the ship's radio operator, was not granted bail and was ordered to remain in pre-trial detention until February 24th for reasons that are still unclear and under investigation, according to Julie Bishop, spokesperson for the Australian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Bail for each person was set at 2 million rubles, which amounts to 61,000 American dollars. With the granting of bail to foreign activists, multiple legal questions were raised. Russia's Federal Migration Service issued a statement saying that those granted bail cannot leave Russia until the criminal investigation against them is over. However, the state ITAR TASS news agency quoted a well-connected Russian lawyer, Gendry Reznik, as saying that the law does not ban them from leaving Russia pending their trial. He added that charges against them would likely be dropped under an upcoming amnesty marking the 20th anniversary of Russia's constitution. There is also the issue of visas, since the bailed activists will be allowed to freely move around St. Petersburg despite not having a Russian visa, which would make their stay a legal one. For all 30 Greenpeace activists, hooliganism charges still stand despite international pressure on President Putin to quickly drop the charges and let the Arctic 30 return to their homes. In reference to the Greenpeace environmentalists, President Putin said last Thursday that their work is noble. However, the way their operation was implemented was wrong. The president stressed, quote, "Not all noble goals can be achieved by any means," and that they had violated international law.
It would be better if Greenpeace representatives sat with us together in this hall and told us what they think about the problems we're discussing. They could state their complaints, demands, and concerns. No one is trying to brush them aside. We gather for meetings like this specifically to discuss such problems. It's obvious they are not pirates, but they tried to storm the platform.
Foreign governments, Greenpeace International, and global civil society have criticized Russia for its harsh treatment of what was supposed to be a peaceful protest against offshore drilling. Drilling of this sort could yet lead to great environmental damages like those seen during the 2010 oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico. This is Katya Bibi for the Global Current.
Last up in news, staffer Alexander Weber examines potential reasons behind the Sunni-backed bombing of Iran's embassy in Lebanon.
A double suicide bombing hit the Iranian embassy in Beirut on Tuesday. Up to 25 people have been killed, including Iran's cultural attaché to Lebanon, Sheikh Ibrahim Ansari, and over 100 were injured in the blasts. According to Time, al-Qaeda-linked Sunni militant group Abdullah Azam Brigades has claimed responsibility for the bombings. The attackers were reported as utilizing vehicles, with the first suicide bomber approaching the gates of the embassy on motorcycle, and the second in a van packed with 100 pounds of explosives. Reuters reported of a tweet sent out by the leader of the Azam Brigades, Sheikh Sirjuddin Zuriakat, calling the operation a double martyrdom operation by two of the Sunni heroes of Lebanon. Middle Eastern correspondent for the BBC, Paul Wood, believes the attacks on the Iranian embassy in Beirut can clearly be seen as a result of the current Syrian civil war. Iran is one of the largest supporters of the Shia militant group Hezbollah. Southern Lebanon, including the neighborhood of Beirut where the embassy is located, is considered a Hezbollah stronghold. The group has backed the Assad regime during the civil war against the Sunni rebels, who are currently struggling in their quest to overthrow Assad. Rebel supply routes in Lebanon are close to being taken by the Syrian government. Shiite Iran is also one of Bashar al-Assad's greatest supporters in the region, lending crucial arms and aid that have helped the regime make significant advances in their fight against the Sunni-backed rebels. Iranian analyst Cliff Kupchan tells the New York Times that Iran's support for Assad is an endless drain on Iran's resources. The political strain that accompanies Iran's support for Assad is widespreading. Iranian nationals are angered by the billions of dollars spent abroad that could be utilized domestically. Internationally, both Saudi Arabia and the United States, both of whom support the rebel cause, are agitated by Iran's actions. As tensions rise between Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia, many believe the Syrian conflict is becoming a proxy war, says the New York Times. Paul Wood asks a Hezbollah member of Lebanese parliament, Nawar al-Sahili, about the Syrian connection.
Isn't this payback for what the Iranians are doing in Syria?
Maybe it's a message. It's a message. But we are trying to say that everybody now is convinced that the solution in Syria is a political solution. So who did this now, I think, doesn't want a political solution.
The bombings carried out by the Azam Brigades has been denounced and reprimanded across the globe. However, with Hezbollah hinting towards a political resolution, hope for a peaceful end may be in the future for Syria. Alex Weber for the Global Current.
Moving on to analysis, Connor McDonough informs us on the recent reforms by the Chinese Communist Party and what they could mean for the future of human rights and economic growth in China.
China has come a long way since the widespread human rights abuses of the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, but this can't counter the country's bad reputation concerning human rights ever since the iconic Tiananmen Square protests in the 90s. However, the second week of November, the Chinese Communist Party made some fairly significant changes. The reforms came out of the Chinese Communist Party's third plenum, where the country's top 400 party leaders set out a design for the future of China. The biggest reforms are an easing of China's well-known one-child policy, an end to the use of prison labor in China, and a reduction in the amount of crimes that warrant execution. While these reforms are seen as substantial strides, they are a long way from ideal. Until these new reforms, China's one-child policy regulated that a couple may only have more than one child if both partners were only children. Now, with these new reforms, a couple may have more than one child if at least one of the partners was an only child. This has obvious economic benefits. According to Bank of America, this could lead to 9.5 million more births next year. China's working-age population is slowly dying off, and the intended increase in population is seen as a way to better prepare the country's labor force to take care of the aging populace. For the first time last year, China's population did not grow. This could have long-term repercussions for China's continued economic growth. This change in policy could largely be due to the Communist Party's fears of a slowdown or pause in economic growth. The second of these recent civil reforms in China is their abolishment of prison labor, or as called by the government there, the Re-Education Through Labor program. Primarily, the program was used to punish petty crimes and political enemies. The Re-Education Through Labor program was not only wrong because of the international moratorium on prison labor, but also because it was able to incarcerate for up to 3 years without any semblance of a trial. The acceptance of these reforms by Chinese leaders carries an important message. The BBC's Martin Patience explains.
So it's clear that China's leaders seem to be sending a signal that they want to see a greater legal framework when it comes to these types of cases.
Over the years, China has slowly been lessening the amount of crimes that warrant the death penalty. The recent announcement out of the Third Plenum was very vague on the details of this, but it is a stated goal. For this and the other reforms, the public is taking a wait-and-see approach before believing. While these reforms may be good signs concerning human rights in China, they are still a long way from where China needs to be. Alongside the need for further reforms, as the U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew states, the pace of these reforms is key. Even China's own president, Xi Jinping, has given them until 2020 to achieve decisive results. This illuminates the balancing act that China's leadership is trying to take. If China moves too quickly, they risk opening the metaphorical floodgates and causing a rush for reforms that could be destabilizing. If China moves too slowly, then they are seen as not committed to reforms, or worse, Xi Jinping is seen as not in control. China needs to appease the masses with reforms for fear of loss of control. The worry of Xi's lack of control was actually the initial reaction when the plenum's reforms were only rumors. All in all, China's reforms are a slow step in the right direction, but even those involved, human rights groups, foreign leaders, and the Chinese public, are unimpressed and looking for more action than words. Chinese leaders will need to continue to release a steady stream of information, reforms, and actions. For now, this is just one step down a long road. Connor McDonough, Global Current.
And finally, in analysis, staffer Amanda Noon sheds light on the unsettling actions by the daughter of Uzbekistan's dictator and what they could signify for the country's upcoming presidential elections in 2015.
Last month, during Uzbekistan's annual Style.uz art festival, 4 television channels went off the air without prior warning. The art-chosen channels were later linked to Gulnara Karimova, daughter of the president of Uzbekistan. The disappearance of the channel symbolized a turn of events for Miss Karimova. As the first daughter, she has had major power and resources in the country. As a businesswoman, she developed a reputation for snatching successful businesses away from their owners. She had used her several radio and TV stations as a way to promote her image as one of an art patron and philanthropist. Also, she had created a fashion line and attempted to launch a career as a pop star, despite the fact that pop music has been banned in the country for being immoral and unpatriotic. On a national and international level, she had started to use her image at home as a way to campaign for the presidential seat she hopes to inherit from her father, as well as gaining influence worldwide. She became Uzbekistan's ambassador for the United Nations in Geneva. There, she used her position to gain diplomatic immunity and promote her fashion and music careers. Earlier this year, however, her glamorous lifestyle took a drastic turn. In January, documents found in Sweden found that a top Swedish telecom company named Telia Sonera had bribed Ms. Karimova $340 million as a way to gain entry into the Uzbek market. While it is uncertain if it was pressure from Swedish and Swiss officials or if it was her own decision, she stepped down from her role at the UN and thus lost her diplomatic immunity. Soon after her departure from the post, French authorities searched her properties in the country at the request of Swiss authorities. Recently, banks both inside and outside Uzbekistan have frozen her accounts. Those who have worked with her have also suffered the consequences of her actions. Her cousin and business partner was arrested for organizing a crime ring after returning to Uzbekistan from Dubai. Considered by many to be the single most hated person in Uzbekistan, Gulnara Karimova's escapades and investigations into her business practices have begun to shed light on her family and the way that they control the country. Her father, Islam Karimov, has ruled the country with an iron fist since he gained power in 1992 in an illegitimate election. Since then, there have been more illegitimate elections, with little to no political opposition groups. In the most recent election, only candidates who supported him were allowed to run for president. He has also been accused by several human rights organizations for vast human rights violations, including reports in which he boiled political opponents alive. The Uzbekistani government has also been accused of taking children out of school in order to work in the cotton fields for the annual harvest. According to a report by the BBC, the president has used the threat of Islamic militancy as a rationale for his tough rule. In a recent interview with the BBC, Gulnara's sister Lola stated that the family was deeply divided and that her father had ordered an investigation into her sister's practices. In response, Gulnara has accused her sister of witchcraft, her mother of being a devil worshipper, and most importantly, has compared her father to Joseph Stalin, an accusation that would normally never be permitted to be made. While family disputes are nothing new, the inner conflict between the president and his daughter could not only impact their personal wealth, but the future of the country. Uncertainty about whom, if anyone in the family, would inherit his title could not only lead to political chaos and instability, but it could lead to violence and civil war. The country, known for having weak institutions, could suffer drastically if a smooth political transition is not present. This could also have an impact on Uzbekistan's neighbor, Afghanistan, and the U.S.'s departure from that country. With an upcoming presidential election in 2015, time will tell whether Gulnara Karimova will become Uzbekistan's next president. This has been Amanda Noon for the Global Current. And wrapping up the show, executive producer Laura Toledo reports on President of the American Foreign Service Association, Robert Silverman's visit to Seton Hall. For additional perspective, newly minted Foreign Service Officer and School of Diplomacy alum Stephanie Parenti also joins her.
This past Tuesday, a small group of undergrad and graduate diplomacy students had the opportunity to sit down with Robert Silverman, current president of the American Foreign Service Association. The AFSA is the professional association and labor union of the United States Foreign Service and is made up of over 16,000 members. A distinguished Foreign Service Officer, or FSO, Robert Silverman has served with the Department of State for over 20 years in long-reaching locations from Baku, Azerbaijan to Tikrit, Iraq. Mr. Silverman spoke on the current climate of U.S. foreign affairs and some of the challenges and opportunities that come with working for the Foreign Service. With foreign wars winding down, the need for diplomacy and foreign engagement is ever increasing. While government budget woes have slowed hiring throughout federal agencies, opportunities still abound to stand out as a candidate and a foreign service officer. To hear more about these opportunities, we are proud to welcome back Stephanie Parenti Giordano, Seton Hall School of Diplomacy and International Relations and GlobalCurrent alum. Upon receiving her master's degree in May, she has started her career as an FSO and recently received word of her first post in Stockholm, Sweden. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You first began your relationship with the Department of State in 2011 when you were awarded the Pickering Fellowship. Can you describe that process and what the Pickering program granted you?
It's a really competitive process. It begins with sending in basic application with your information. I worked really closely with the director of prestigious awards. Her name is Nicole Gelfert at the University of Central Florida in the Burnett Honors College. And she helped me with 27 drafts of my personal statement.
Wow.
I did get accepted to go forward and do the oral application process with 40 other students. Only 20 of us were going to be selected. Everyone I met there was incredibly qualified, but I managed to pull through that too, and I was awarded the fellowship. The fellowship helps you with your college education. So for an undergrad fellowship, it will pay for your last year of your undergraduate and your first year of your graduate. For me, I got the graduate fellowship, so it assisted me in paying tuition for my graduate education, and you, in turn, offer 3 years of service through the Foreign Service.
And now, when was your first visit to the headquarters of the State Department in Foggy Bottom? Was this when you did your oral application process for the Pickering?
No, that took place at a hotel where we stayed because it was a 2-day process. My first day at Maine State was the first day of my internship with the Office of Central European Affairs in the European and Eurasian Affairs Bureau. And that was an incredible experience. It's an overwhelming building. It is so huge that I still to this day don't know how to get to certain places when I have to go there. And so there was a gap at desk of Poland. And about 3 weeks into my internship, my boss sat me down and said, "You are going to be the acting desk officer to Poland." So I learned on the job, but it was an incredible experience.
All right, so you've mentioned it a little bit already. Can you talk a little bit more about how your interaction with the State Department played out over your graduate career? First, you had this summer internship you just mentioned. What did you do once you started working on that desk?
It was a lot of research. The desk officer's main role is to be a liaison between the embassy in that country and Washington. You know, they're going to tell us what's going on the ground there and what type of issues are they negotiating or working out, or even what type of public diplomacy events they're doing. And they bring it back to Washington, and we relay that to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of our bureau, and it makes its way up the chain to the Secretary of State and possibly to the President, depending on what the issue is. Specifically, some of the things I worked on, we were appointing a new ambassador to Poland, Ambassador Stephen Mull. I worked on his congressional hearing paperwork, about 15 different papers I drafted for him on issues relating to Russia, to energy, all kinds of things, as well as a 50-page document of questions and answers that Ambassador Mull might be asked by Congress for his confirmation hearing. Probably the most exciting thing I did while there was renegotiate our protecting power in Syria. Poland was serving as our protecting power, which means they were protecting Americans who were in Syria on our behalf. When they shut down their embassy, we had to find a new one, and we were able to renegotiate that with the Czech Republic. In the case of Syria, we literally shut down the embassy, so there's nobody there representing, America's diplomatic corps in the country. So we needed somebody there who would act on our behalf and protect the American citizens that were still remaining there. I later interned in Lithuania with the public affairs section, and that was a lot of going out into the public, making speeches, being the face of America that Lithuanians could talk to, ask their questions to, and just building up that relationship between our two countries, which already have a fantastic relationship.
Now, what kind of questions did you get asked? Was there anything memorable?
Memorable? Not that I can think of now. I mean, the one thing that happened there was I was helping organize the American support for the LGBT week in the Baltic states. So all three, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, got together and held, a whole week of LGBT events that eventually culminated into a pride parade. And we brought over Betty, which is a women's empowerment LGBT all-girls band from New York. They're most well known for writing the theme song to The L Word. And we also brought over the nephew of Harvey Milk. His name is Stuart Milk. And we did a lot of civil society actions, events, talking to them. But the parade was certainly interesting. There were quite a few counter-protesters there. It was incredibly honoring to stand up for Lithuania's human rights as an American.
Now that you've been confirmed as a Foreign Service Officer, what have your first few months with State been like? What can you tell us about your work that you're undergoing right now? What have you been up to?
The first 6 weeks, you are in what's called A100. This is basically an orientation for Foreign Service Officers, and we learn the ins and outs of the State Department, and we talk a lot about our interagency work that we do with USAID and all the other agencies that are represented abroad, including the military, etc. It culminates into your Flag Day, which is you bid on your second week in A100, and you find out on Flag Day where it is you got posted. After that, they give you training based off of where you're going. So I'm going to Stockholm, and I did European area studies for 2 weeks, and right now I'm serving a bridge assignment, so I'm doing work and training. I'm currently working in the Consular Affairs Bureau as an assignment assistant, helping the assignment officers give consular officers their new tour dates and where they're going and what they'll be doing, and a lot of paperwork that goes with that, making sure that they get there on time and that they have the necessary training to do that job. And after this, I'll go into my consular general course, learning how to be a consular officer, and then Swedish language, and then I'll be sent off in August.
That's very exciting. So now you mentioned it, and Robert Silverman also spoke with us briefly about other aspects of the Foreign Service like USAID, the Agency of International Development, and then civil service.